Serious, what was your scariest weather-related experience? On our drive from Mississippi to California, we found ourselves caught in a massive desert storm somewhere in Arizona, or maybe New Mexico. It started out like any typical rainstorm, with wind and water falling steadily. But after just a few minutes, everything escalated. The dry, parched ground couldn't absorb the rain fast enough, and instead, it kicked up huge clouds of dust. Within minutes, the visibility on both sides of the road was completely gone, with dust swirling up to about 30 feet in the air. Above that, the rain fell relentlessly, and the freeway seemed to slice right through this massive dust cloud. It felt like we were witnessing something biblical, like Moses parting the sea, but instead, it was a freeway cutting through a wall of dust. At first, it was kind of fascinating, but things took a sharp turn when lightning began to strike. Each flash illuminated the swirling dust, revealing several tornadoes or dust devils twisting on either side of us. The scene was both beautiful and terrifying. We decided it was best to find shelter and pulled into a nearby motel. As we rushed into the lobby, more people from the highway followed us inside. Just as we got inside, the storm really ramped up and hail started to pelt the building. In the chaos, one man slipped in the parking lot, cutting himself badly. My husband and I rushed back outside to help him, literally dragging him back into the lobby. Once inside, we joined the others, along with 6 hotel staff members, and we all huddled together. The motel's security cameras were the only window to the outside, and we watched the footage from the desk computer. One by one, the cameras were knocked out by hail or wind until the screen was just static and the only thing we could hear was the deafening howl of the storm outside. The entire scene felt like something out of a disaster movie. It's an experience I'll never forget. One night, my dad and I were watching a huge storm from the garage, the door wide open as the winds howled and the rain came down. Suddenly, the storm grew so intense that the power went out and the garage door was still up. My dad, whose jokes often aren't the most tactful, just covered his mouth and muttered, "Oh shit." Naturally, I panicked. I was 10 years old, so I rushed to ask, what's wrong? Dad, sounding more serious than usual, explained, "The power went out and the garage is still open." Worried, I asked, "Why does that matter?" He looked at me and, with a straight face, said, "Well, it creates a negative pressure that could cause the house to explode." I froze, my heart racing, and I immediately started crying as I sprinted to find my mom. Dad thought it was hilarious. I grew up in rural North Dakota, and about 10 years ago, a massive blizzard hit that trapped my family and me in our house for 4 days. The snowdrifts piled up to 8 feet high. The temperature dropped to a bone-chilling negative 30 degrees, and we lived 15 miles from town, pretty typical for North Dakota winters. For me and my 3 siblings, it wasn't terrifying, it was actually a blast. My brother and I spent hours jumping off the roof into the snowbanks and digging tunnels through the yard. But here's the part that makes it truly chilling. My parents didn't tell us until we were adults, but they only had 2 days worth of food in the house. For 4 whole days, they didn't eat anything, making sure we had enough to eat. We never understood why my mom cried when the roads finally opened up. Now, I realize those were tears of relief. My parents are incredibly selfless, and they sacrificed so much for us. If you can, take a moment to hug your mom. She deserves it. It was a typical late January afternoon in middle school, the kind where a light snow had been falling steadily under a thick blanket of clouds. I just finished up some after-school activity and used the payphone by the entrance to call my mom, letting her know I was ready to be picked up. I settled in to wait outside, leaning against a metal bike rack. That's when the impossible happened. A sharp crack of thunder ripped through the muffled quiet of the snowy afternoon. I was instantly bewildered. Thunder in the snow? I'd never even heard of such a thing as a thunder blizzard, but that's precisely what was unfolding. Within what felt like mere minutes, the weather took a dramatic and terrifying turn. A dense fog seemed to roll in out of nowhere. The gentle snowfall intensified into a blinding flurry, and a fierce wind began to whip around me. And then there was the lightning, bright, jagged flashes accompanied by deafening claps of thunder, happening again and again, almost relentlessly. Instinctively, I scrambled away from the exposed bike racks, seeking refuge in a small alcove built into the school wall, trying to shield myself from the biting wind. Maybe 30 seconds after I'd moved, a blinding bolt of lightning struck the very bike rack I had just been leaning against. The flash was searing, the sound deafening. Growing up in the Midwest, I was no stranger to either thunderstorms or blizzards. They were just a part of life. But experiencing both at the same time, this violent convergence of winter and electrical storm, and then witnessing that lightning strike where I had just been standing, that was a level of fear I hadn't known before. It shook me to my core. I was alone in my little wooden house when Hurricane Charlie tore through Florida. The power had long since gone out, and I was huddled inside, the flickering flame of a single candle my only companion as a truly hellish storm raged outside, rattling the very foundations of my home. The wind howled like a banshee, and the rain lashed against the windows with relentless fury. At one point, driven by a morbid curiosity, or perhaps just the need to see the chaos, I cautiously got up and peered out a window. Through the driving rain and wind, I saw a series of bizarre green flashes erupting all over the landscape. It took a moment for the terrifying realization to dawn on me. Those weren't some strange atmospheric phenomenon. They were power transformers exploding, one after another, painting the dark, stormy night with an eerie, unnatural green light. I was walking home from a friend's place when a massive bolt of lightning nearly hit me. It was thick, blindingly bright, and the thunder cracked so loudly it rattled my chest. The air sizzled. I could actually taste the burn of ozone. It must have struck about 400 feet behind my house. When I was 11, one summer afternoon, it was just me and my two sisters home alone when a tornado hit. We lived way out in the country, far from any warning sirens. It started as a regular thunderstorm, but it kept growing darker and more intense by the minute. Then, in the middle of the worst of it, everything suddenly stopped. Every bit of wind just died, like someone had flipped a switch. I remember looking out at the tallest trees and seeing the highest leaves completely still. That's when we really knew something was wrong. A few moments later, we heard a low rumbling sound in the distance, like a train coming, except there weren't any tracks anywhere near us. That's the unmistakable sign of a tornado. We panicked and raced down into the basement. From a window, we saw the funnel cloud sweep across nearby farm fields, then tear through our neighbor's backyard, tossing a metal barrel into the air like it was nothing. As it approached our house, it suddenly lifted, skipping right over us. It ripped the antenna off the roof, but somehow that was the only damage. One morning, I woke up to my dog barking for breakfast. I hadn't slept well, so I was still in a bit of fog as I stumbled out to the screened-in porch and poured her a bowl of food. It took a moment for my brain to catch up, but when it did, I realized something was seriously off. The sky was eerily dark, and there was this intense whooshing sound all around me, like I was standing inside a wind tunnel. I glanced over at my dog, who was visibly panicking in the corner, but stubbornly refused to leave her food bowl. It took some frantic yelling before she finally abandoned the kibble. Later, once everything calmed down, I turned on the news and found out that a tornado had basically passed right over our house. So yeah, short version, I accidentally fed my dog outside in the middle of a tornado. I used to ask my father what the scariest part of a hurricane was. He grew up in a country where they struck fairly often, so I figured he'd have a good answer. Without hesitation, he always said the same thing, the sound. I didn't get it. How bad could wind really sound? Then Hurricane Sandy hit the East Coast. In the middle of the storm, curiosity got the better of me. I cracked open the front door just to hear this supposedly terrifying sound for myself. I was expecting something like a louder version of regular wind. Chaotic, sure, but familiar. He wasn't wrong. The noise that met me was beyond description, something no recording could ever truly capture. It wasn't just wind. It was a monstrous, all-consuming roar like some ancient, omnipotent chimera screaming in endless rage. It felt alive. And the breath behind that roar had the power to rip homes from their foundations and hurl boats inland like discarded toys. In that moment, it sounded less like weather and more like something divine and wrathful, a creature born from myth or nightmare. The fear it sparked wasn't logical. It was primal, the kind that reaches deep into your bones and reminds you how small you really are. And this was a relatively soft hit for our area. Some downed trees, a few scattered boats, but no deaths, no major destruction. I still can't imagine what it was like for the people who were in the path of the storm at its worst. What made it truly terrifying, though, and this is true of all natural disasters, is the helplessness. Throughout history, we've fought and conquered so many threats: predators, diseases, the seas, even each other. But against the raw force of nature, there's no fight, only flight. All we can do is evacuate, leave everything behind, and hope for the best. In that doorway, as the hurricane screamed like a god of old, I finally understood why ancient people described storms as sentient, divine forces. When you hear that sound and witness even a fraction of the destruction, you can't help but feel the same. A few years ago, my husband and I were driving home from an out-of-state trip in late March, right at the start of tornado season. We stopped in Joplin, Missouri for dinner before finishing the last leg of our drive into Oklahoma. While we were eating, I caught a glimpse of the weather forecast on a nearby TV. It showed a nasty storm system a couple hundred miles away. It looked serious, but based on its trajectory, it seemed like we'd just miss it if we left immediately and stuck to the turnpike. There's a long stretch between Missouri and Tulsa where exits are few and far between. No gas stations, no rest stops, just open road. As we got deeper into that no man's land, the sky turned darker. Lightning started striking closer and closer, one bolt hitting the side of the road not far from us. That's when the unease turned into real fear. We drove under a massive wall cloud, watching it loom over the highway. Then my phone buzzed, a tornado warning for our exact location. I showed it to my husband, and not even 5 seconds later, a funnel cloud began to form ahead of us, not even a mile down the road. At last, an exit appeared. We swerved off the highway just as the funnel touched down. It looked massive, though I couldn't say exactly how big, and we pulled into the first place we found, a gas station. Dozens of strangers were already rushing inside. Just after we got through the doors, the power went out. I called my mom, told her what was happening, and told her I loved her. At that point, I was certain we were about to be in real danger, maybe worse. But at the last second, the tornado shifted. It veered off its path and hit a nearby residential area instead. I believe a few houses were destroyed. I'm not sure how many people were hurt, but I think there were some casualties. When it was over, we got back in the car and finished the drive home, shaken and quiet. It was one of the scariest moments of my life, a reminder of how quickly everything can change and how powerless you can feel in the face of nature. One morning, I was getting ready for middle school around 8:15. Normally, the sun would be up by then, but instead, the sky was filled with dark, heavy clouds. I could hear thunder rumbling, but it sounded strangely muffled, like it was trapped inside the clouds. I walked to the bus, feeling uneasy. The sky kept getting darker, and then the rain started, fast and heavy. As the bus rolled through the neighborhood, the atmosphere felt tense. That's when we found out a tornado had formed nearby. It didn't hit us directly, but it was close enough to scare a few kids into crying. While we were stopped to pick someone up, a bolt of lightning struck the ground near a tree, not far from the bus. The flash lit up the whole area, and the thunder that followed was absolutely deafening. Seeing it happen that close was terrifying. By the time we got to school, the storm had started to pass. About 30 minutes into first period, we had a tornado drill, but the worst of the fear had already faded. Still, that morning stuck with me. It was one of those moments where you realize just how unpredictable the weather and the world can be. It was a thunderstorm, and I knew it was going to be a bad one. As it rolled in, I quickly ran over to my neighbor's house to make sure her dog was secured, and thankfully he was. But as I turned to head back home, the wind hit. It came out of nowhere, sudden, violent, and overwhelming. In the short distance between her house and mine, just a few hundred feet, chaos broke loose. Trees and massive branches started crashing down around me, one after another, in just seconds. At least 6 or 7 came down in that tiny window of time. One huge branch slammed into the ground about 10 feet from where I was running. The sound is burned into my memory, the roaring gust, followed by the sharp crack of splintering wood, then the thunderous crash as trees hit the ground. It was a microburst, fast and ferocious. And I've never looked at storms the same way since. The past 2 nights have been a nightmare. Water started seeping in from every corner of the house, through the floors, walls, you name it. I burned through every single towel I had just trying to keep up, even resorting to sacrificing one of my blankets. Sorry, Spider-Man. You really took one for the team. But as bad as the flooding was, that wasn't even the worst part. Because the city's water system was completely overwhelmed, raw sewage began rising up through my toilet and bathtub. Within less than 30 minutes, the bathtub was completely filled with nasty, brown water, and I couldn't even imagine what might have been floating in it. I spent the whole night, literally the whole night from sunset until early dawn, scooping out bucket after bucket and dumping out the bathroom window. When the rain finally stopped at dawn, the sewage kept rising for a while, but slowly started to go back down. For the next few hours, I took naps in 1-hour shifts, waking up just to check if it was rising again or finally going down. I guess I can say I won the battle for now, but honestly, it doesn't feel like a victory. When raw sewage is involved, there's no winner. Everyone loses. As a Canadian, I'd say the most dangerous weather experience we've had where I lived was the massive ice storm of 1998. Everything was frozen, power lines were bent and snapped, cars were completely iced over, trees broke and crashed into houses, and people living on the outskirts of the city, near farmlands, were practically cut off from the world. No heat, no communication. I was a kid at the time, and I clearly remember my dad pulling out a radio, trying to dial on a station to get news and emergency updates in a time when most of that info came from the TV or newspapers. But hey, I'm Canadian. Harsh winters are just part of the deal. So while the ice storm knocked things out for a while, most people were like, yeah, this is fine, it'll pass. You know what really freaked everyone out, though? The one time we had a tiny earthquake that lasted like 3 seconds. It didn't destroy anything, but suddenly every single person in town, including me, was shouting, "Holy shit, an earthquake. OH my God." It was absolutely terrifying for those 3 seconds, even though it was harmless. Definitely not the most dangerous thing I've been through, but at that moment, I honestly thought I was going to die for no reason. When I was in kindergarten, my parents went to a work dinner, so my siblings and I were just hanging out, watching Nickelodeon. Suddenly, the TV signal cut out, so we switched to another TV to watch Monsters Incorporated. But then, just as we were getting comfortable, the power went out and all hell broke loose. A deafening storm of hail started hammering the house, and we all scrambled to hide in the bathroom, waiting for our parents to come home. There was another time, not long after. The tornado sirens blared, and my family huddled in the bathroom for what felt like forever, probably 7 hours through the night. When we finally got the all clear to leave, we stepped out to find all the windows were shattered, and the yard looked like a war zone. We drove around the neighborhood, and it was chaos. Every sign was down, and our neighbor's trampoline was somehow sitting on their roof. It was wild, but now, when tornado sirens go off, I'm the one standing outside, watching it all roll in. Midwest life, I guess. We were driving home from the in-laws when the weather alert sound blared on the radio, followed by the robotic voice warning about potential tornadoes in the area. We didn't think much of it. After all, we weren't in a tornado-prone zone. Then, out of nowhere, and I mean out of nowhere, it started pouring rain. The wind was so strong it was driving the rain sideways, and we couldn't see a thing. So, we pulled over, hoping it would pass quickly. As we sat there, the wind picked up even more, and suddenly, the car started shaking violently on the side of the road. It felt like the car was going to get blown right off the road. It only lasted about a minute, but it felt like an eternity. And just like that, it was over. From that moment on, I'll never ignore those weather alerts again. Also, lesson learned. Keeping the radio on for weather updates, not just music from your phone or a CD, can make all the difference. It wasn't the storm itself that was scary. It was the fact that I couldn't find my pet in the middle of some really terrible weather. I have a free-roaming bunny. He's huge, and I always felt bad keeping him confined to a cage with so little space to move. So, we let him run around the backyard. One night, there was a heavy storm, and the rain was coming down in sheets. I was outside, desperately trying to get him inside. He was terrified, darting behind bushes and diving into a little hole he'd dug under the house. Suddenly, the wind picked up, and it got so loud I couldn't hear myself calling for him. I turned around, and my heart stopped. There was a tornado, maybe half a mile away. I couldn't tell where it was headed, but I wasn't thinking about that. All I could think about was getting my bunny inside, because there was a tornado out there that could easily pick him up and carry him away. Finally, I managed to grab him and ran inside, diving into the closet with him. I was shaken, but we were safe. In hindsight, he probably would have been okay under the house, but I couldn't just leave him out there in the middle of it all. A couple of years ago, around Christmas, my so and I were at his grandma's house, and there were storms brewing nearby. We decided to leave when we noticed a break in the weather. We took some back roads and finally got on the highway, which led us over a long bridge that spanned a lake. The sky was dark and ominous, but we didn't think much of it first. Then, out of nowhere, there was a flash of lightning that lit up the sky and revealed this massive tornado, like something straight out of Twister. I'm talking about the big one that looks like it could tear the whole world apart. Fortunately, we were still a couple miles back, but we watched it cross the highway in front of us. We didn't waste any time, hit the gas and drove straight to my mom's house as fast as we could. I still think about it all the time. If we had left his grandmother's house just a few minutes earlier, we would have been right in its path. I was almost 14, living on a small horse farm just outside of Xenia, Ohio. Our home was a brick farmhouse built after the Civil War, surrounded by white-painted board fencing. We had an 8-stall Amish-built barn, a 2-story structure, and 20 acres of pasture, all enclosed by the same sturdy fencing. That day, my mom kept me home from school. I wanted nothing more than to ride my horse, but she had a funny feeling and asked me to stay close to the house. It was hard to stay inside because it was such a beautiful morning. I helped her with chores, fed the animals, and by the afternoon I was outside sitting on the big grassy lawn next to the house, tossing a ball to my dog. It was oppressively hot and humid, and the air felt completely still. My mom kept coming out onto the back porch and glancing toward the west. I noticed she seemed uneasy, but neither of us said anything. Later, she admitted she didn't want to worry me. Then, while I sat there with my dog, I felt a strange, shockingly cold gust of wind swirl around me, sending goosebumps down my arms. The air was thick with something, almost electric. I looked around and realized that the light had changed. The world seemed sharper, almost glowing with a greenish amber hue. The grass, the leaves on the trees, they all looked incredibly vibrant. It was then that a strong, cold breeze hit the big maple tree nearby, and I watched in awe as the leaves on one side of the tree flipped upside down. That's when Mom came outside, and we both looked southwest. A wall of dark, greenish-black clouds had formed, and it was heading straight for us. In an instant, she snapped into action. "Come with me and put the horses out quick." We ran to the barn, letting the horses roam free, and I galloped my Appaloosa to the back gate to let them escape. I hurried back, removed his halter, and released him before running to the house. By then, my mom had opened the outside cellar doors, and I called my dog to follow me as we bolted down the stairs. When I got to the cellar, I was stunned to see that my mom had prepared for something. There were blankets, pillows, flashlights, water jugs, and a cooler of snacks tucked in the corner. We didn't have any tornado warnings or sirens, but I wasn't as surprised as I probably should have been. My family has always had a strong instinct for things like this. I stood at the high cellar window, looking out through the window well. That's when I saw it coming up through the back field, as wide at the base as it was at the top, black as coal. It was twisting and hopping, picking up debris with it. By that point, the roar of the tornado was deafening. We couldn't hear each other screaming. I knew it was headed for the barn, and sure enough, it struck. But thankfully, the tornado hopped, taking off half of the barn's roof. Mom and I huddled together, surrounded by blankets, but it didn't make the fear go away. The aftermath was brutal. I ended up with splinters of wood in my scalp, face, and arms from the debris that came into the cellar. The air was thick with mud and sawdust, and I even had splinters in my mouth, piercing my tongue. I should have kept my mouth shut, but the scream just escaped me until the air was sucked out of my lungs. For a while, I couldn't breathe, let alone scream. My ears felt like they were full of railroad spikes. I glanced up once and saw the kitchen ceiling above us, the floor in the kitchen, bulging upward. It was like the house itself was breathing. When it was over, we lost most of the kitchen floor tiles, dishes, silverware, and windows. The barn's roof was gone. Part of the 100-year-old fencing was destroyed, and some trees were uprooted. Horse tack, tools, and other things gone, never to be found again. Eventually, someone came by to check on us, and we were taken to the hospital. I had to undergo what I call getting plucked, like a dog getting porcupine quills removed. Not as bad, but still painful. What was worse was the iodine scrub on my wounds. The splinters and abrasions from the debris could easily lead to infection, especially considering what the tornado had picked up along the way. You don't want to think about the mix of debris, manure, and who knows what else swirling in that storm. But I didn't feel too bad knowing my mom was getting the same treatment in the next cubby. The horses were fine, but the chickens didn't survive. To this day, I can't walk into a lumber yard or eat with a wooden spoon without feeling like I might gag. My friend and I were out running errands when suddenly a massive storm rolled in. The sky darkened quickly, and the rain started coming down in sheets. Lightning crackled across the sky, and we could see it lighting up everything around us. Then, out of nowhere, one of the bolts struck a fence just a few yards away from where we were standing. The whole thing was terrifying, but what made it even more surreal was the fact that it was December 21st, 2012. We had both heard all the hype about the supposed end of the world, and in that moment, with the storm raging and lightning flashing all around us, we couldn't help but think, this is it. For a split second, we truly believed the world was coming to an end. I've always hated flying. Actually, hate doesn't quite cut it. I'm straight up paranoid at the thought of getting on an airplane. I won't bore you with all the details, but for as long as I can remember, I've had this irrational fear that won't go away. I even get recurring nightmares about airliner crashes, and have had them since I was a child. Still, life goes on, and sometimes I have to fly. I usually stick to short flights, around 2 hours or so, because they're more manageable. I thought I had a good strategy to keep the anxiety at bay, and up until that point, I'd managed to avoid any major nightmare scenarios. That is, until Christmas 2005. I was flying from Oregon to Las Vegas, and everything seemed pretty normal as we took off. The weather was fine, nothing out of the ordinary. But about 20 minutes into the flight, the captain came on the intercom with the kind of news no one wants to hear. All right, folks, I'm going to be honest with you. We thought this flight was going to be pretty smooth, but in about 15 minutes, we're heading into some rough weather we can't avoid. It's going to get pretty ugly, so just know that this is normal, but it'll be like this all the way to Vegas. The moment he said that, I went into full-on panic mode. My heart was racing. My mind started spinning with images from every disaster movie I'd ever seen. I tried to calm myself down. Maybe a drink would help. But the captain immediately ordered everyone to take their seats and for the flight attendants to buckle down. I couldn't focus on anything. I tried playing my Game Boy, maybe watch a movie, anything to distract myself. But nothing worked. On the outside, I kept it cool, but internally I was a mess. I was fixated on the time. He'd said 15 minutes, so when was this nightmare going to start? Exactly 15 minutes later, we hit it. It felt like the worst possible scenario I had imagined. The plane was jerking and bumping so violently, I honestly didn't think it would be safe to walk down the aisle, even if I had to. I was sitting toward the back, and I could hear things rattling in the overhead compartments. Luggage started popping open. The lights flickered. This was exactly like the scenes from my nightmares since I was a kid. The ones where the plane's shaking and there's chaos everywhere. At one point, we hit a massive air pocket and the plane dropped. I don't know how many feet, but it felt like we fell for miles. In my mind, it was alive, a movie I'd seen as a child that still haunted me to this day. I could hear people around me whispering, their voices trembling with fear. For frequent flyers, this might have been an average inconvenience. For me, it was pure nightmare fuel. My hands were sweating, my knuckles white from gripping the armrest, my entire body locked in terror. I couldn't escape the feeling that something horrible was going to happen. The turbulence lasted for what felt like forever. Every time it eased up, I'd get a brief moment of relief, only for the plane to lurch and shake again. It felt like it was never going to end. The time dragged on, every second a psychological torture. But then, just as the captain had said, it cleared up. Like someone had flipped a switch, the turbulence stopped and everything smoothed out. The rest of the flight was calm. But that hour of chaos, it stuck with me for years. I didn't get back on a plane for at least 6 years after that. It wasn't just a scary experience, it was the kind of terror that sticks with you. Something I'll never forget. There are two things that make this experience stand out as one of the wildest of my life. One, I have a rare sleep disorder that causes me to suddenly wake up from a deep sleep in a full adrenaline rush. I often hallucinate frightening things during these episodes. It doesn't happen all the time, but it's frequent enough, about a few times a month. Two, I've been involved in a lot of natural disaster relief work. So, when it comes to emergencies, I've been through my fair share. Now, let me tell you what happened. It was 2010, and I was in Haiti doing disaster relief after the catastrophic earthquake that had ravaged the country. Aftershocks were a constant threat, and the only place we could set up base camp was a cement building, which, honestly, was nowhere near up to code for safety. To be safe, we had frequent evacuation drills, just in case. It was the middle of the night, and I was sleeping soundly in my mosquito-netted bunk bed inside the cement roof camp. Everything was calm, until suddenly I was up, running for the evacuation spot without knowing why. In a panic, I sprinted, and to my surprise, about 100 other people followed me, all rushing out of their beds. I was terrified and had no idea what was happening. Then the ground started to shake. A 4.2 earthquake hit, almost as powerful as the one that had just destroyed the country. It felt like déjà vu. The weird part? We were already in the evacuation spot, right when it started. It was as though everything had aligned, and we were already where we needed to be. Once the quake passed and the shaking stopped, people started calming down. Then someone from the bunk next to mine asked me, "How did you know the earthquake was about to happen?" The truth? I didn't know. I had no memory of anything until I woke up in the middle of my sprint, which is a typical reaction to my sleep disorder. According to my bunkmate, who couldn't sleep that night, I had suddenly jumped out of bed, screamed bloody murder, and woke up everyone around me. They couldn't stop me, and in my frantic state, I just started running, leading everyone to follow in a panic. I honestly had no clue what was going on, but in some strange way, my sleep disorder may have saved us. We were all already in the right spot, as if I had instinctively known something was coming. It was just another Saturday at home with my dad and brother. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first. The sky looked a little stormy, but I didn't think much of it. What caught my attention, though, was that the blinds were up, which was unusual because we always kept them down. I didn't know at the time, but we were actually under a tornado watch. After a while, I decided to peek out the window to see what was going on. That's when I saw it, a tornado about half a mile away, heading straight toward us. It was a good thing I looked out when I did. We had just enough time to get out of the house, and luckily, the tornado shifted course before it reached us and eventually dissipated. There wasn't much damage nearby, and thankfully, our property was unharmed. But man, tornadoes are terrifying when you see one in person. It's definitely something I won't forget anytime soon. It was midwinter on Glider Fock in Snowdonia, and a whiteout storm had rolled in. As I stepped onto the ice sheet, the gale force winds immediately started pushing me sideways, sending me dangerously close to the cliff's edge. The wind was so fierce that I was shoved nearly 10 yards before I lost my balance. I fell flat on my face and, in a panic, crawled forward until I reached deeper snow, finally finding enough traction to get some grip under my boots. I was training for a marathon and had an 8-mile run planned along the C&O Canal after work. I checked the weather beforehand, and everything seemed fine. But 3 miles in, the sky darkened, and I felt the first raindrops. A few minutes later, I found myself caught in the most intense thunderstorm I've ever experienced. I was completely alone on the canal, and the only way to get back was to retrace my steps, 3 miles of treacherous terrain. The rain was coming down so hard, it was blowing sideways, and I couldn't see more than 2 feet in front of me. The canal had flooded, making it almost impossible to run. To make things worse, I was at a bend where the ground dropped straight down to the Potomac River. It was terrifying. So, I walked as fast as I could, my glasses completely covered in rain and not a dry spot on my clothes to wipe them off. I was scared out of my mind, with constant lightning and thunder shaking the air around me. Then, out of nowhere, there was a loud crack. An enormous tree limb fell to the ground nearby. I wanted to stop and hide, but I knew I had no choice but to keep moving if I was going to make it back to my car. The entire 3-mile run back to my car was drenched with rain, and by the time I got there, I was soaked, covered in mud, and shaking uncontrollably. I cried when I finally made it to the safety of my car. It's the only time something like that's ever happened to me. Tornado season can be downright terrifying, especially if you don't have a solid plan or a safe place to go. Or if you've got someone around who's losing their cool. A couple of years ago, Oklahoma had one of its worst tornado seasons. This was around the time of the May 20th tornado. My family generally knows how to handle tornadoes, except for my dad. When a storm is coming, he goes into full panic mode. It's like he flips a switch and starts running around, yelling, trying to take control, but he's freaking out the whole time. It's chaos. One day, he screams, "Get in the car. We're leaving." My mom tries to calm him down, but in the end, we all pile into the car and take off down the road. At first, everything seems fine. We find a spot to park and wait out the storm. Then, out of nowhere, my dad decides we have to keep moving. He starts making random turns down different roads, and we're listening to the radio, which is advising people in cars to pull over and find shelter immediately. But of course, my dad ignores that and keeps driving. The rain starts pouring down harder and harder, and the visibility is so bad we can't even see a few feet in front of us. At this point, we have no choice but to pull over. The wind is howling so loud it feels like the car might get picked up, and I start hyperventilating. I think I blacked out for a minute. Eventually, we somehow make our way back home as the storm dies down. Turns out, we were right between two storm cells. Now, we got a proper shelter in place. In my 20s, I used to build irrigation systems for farms, the huge ones with multiple humps that you often see sprawling across fields. We had one rule. If we heard thunder, we were done for the day. Those systems are essentially giant lightning rods. One day, we were working on a system and had already put up 3 spans. We were in the middle of setting up the 4th when the weather suddenly turned on us. It started getting bad really quickly. There was a barn nearby, so my coworker, boss, and I made a run for it, ducking inside for cover. Just minutes after we got to the barn, the farmer showed up, furious. He was paying us to build the system, and he wanted it done, now. My boss, with a grin, told him we'd finish the job if he agreed to stand by the system with at least one hand touching it at all times. The farmer lost it. He was cussing and screaming, the wind howling and rain coming down in every direction. It sounded like the barn roof could fly off any second. Then, without warning, lightning struck. Multiple bolts hit the system in quick succession. It was so loud, and we could see the lightning dancing along the metal structure, making its way down to the well that powered the whole thing. The farmer went silent real fast after that. The storm passed as quickly as it had come, but the field was a muddy mess. We couldn't work in it until it dried out, so we had to wait before bringing the crane back in. After that, no farmer ever took us up on the offer to keep a hand on the system. I was in a Cessna with an elderly pilot who, unbeknownst to most, was in the early stages of dementia. He absolutely should not have been flying, but his medical certificate came from a longtime doctor friend, also elderly, who was unaware of the extent of his cognitive decline. The pilot hit it well, too well, in fact. I was the first to notice. It all became clear when we took off from Half Moon Bay Airport, just south of San Francisco, into a thick fog bank. Normally, when flying north from there, there's a specific departure path to avoid crossing into SFO's approach airspace. This involves briefly flying south to gain altitude and clear the ridgeline. The pilot knew this but stubbornly refused, saying he didn't want to waste time or fuel. He filed a flight plan to depart directly. Air traffic control denied his plan, insisting we fly south first. After a brief argument, he reluctantly agreed. So we lifted off and started climbing, slowly flying blindly into the fog. We needed to make a right turn immediately, but to my horror, the pilot began turning east. For those unfamiliar, Half Moon Bay sits on the west side of the San Francisco Peninsula, with a huge mountain ridge running down the middle. If you turn east, you're heading straight into the mountains. I immediately pieced everything together and shouted at him to turn west. Why, he asked. We'll have to turn more than 180 degrees if we go west. It's a shorter turn to go east. The mountains, I cried. We're going to hit the ridge. Grumbling, he reversed the turn. I breathed a sigh of relief, but didn't last long. Air traffic control called in, asking for our position and heading. Since we were flying below the ridgeline, we were out of their radar coverage, and they wanted to confirm we were following the clearance to turn south. Their exact words were something like, Cessna XYZ, confirm altitude and turn south. We do not have radar contact. A normal pilot would have answered something like, Roger, turning south, heading 170, climbing through 1,000 feet for 5,000 feet, but not him. He misinterpreted the we do not have radar contact as Cessna. What are you doing? You should be turning south. See, he shouted at me. They want me to turn right. And so, he turned right again, straight back toward the mountains. The mountains, I screamed. We're going to hit them. At this point, air traffic control called again, sounding a lot more worried. They had no idea what was going on, just that some elderly pilot was arguing over his clearance and flying in thick fog under a ridgeline. They urgently repeated their call. By this time, I was pretty scared, but the moment I heard the new call from air traffic control, panic took over. Cessna XYZ, expedite climb, expedite turn, altitude alert, altitude alert. It was in that moment I realized the danger. We were very close to hitting the mountain. Without thinking, I grabbed the controls and yanked them right to speed up the turn, heading south-southwest. I shouldn't have done it, as it's against protocol to overpower the pilot in command. It also slowed our climb, but at that moment, my instincts told me we'd have a better chance turning around than continuing to climb into that mess. In hindsight, we probably just cleared the ridge with the altitude alert coming as we popped back into radar coverage by just a few feet. But at that moment, all I could think was we're about to fly into the mountain. Eventually, the FAA got involved and the pilot was grounded. He doesn't fly anymore. One night, I was jolted awake by a thunderclap directly above my house. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced, so deafening and powerful that it felt like the world itself had just cracked open. I've heard thunder before, usually from a distance, but this was right on top of me, and it hit with such intensity that it made me leap out of bed, drenched in cold sweat. For a split second, my mind raced, and all I could think was that an explosion had just gone off. In that moment, I understood why ancient cultures used to link storms to the gods. The sound was so overwhelming, so raw in its power, that I could easily believe it was the anger of something far beyond us. If this had been in a more unenlightened time, I'm pretty sure Dave would have been the one getting sacrificed that night. It was 3 p.m. in Texas when the sky suddenly darkened, turning an eerie shade of black and green. The storm rolled in fast, and it got as dark as night in a matter of minutes. I was managing the retail store, and my cashier, who loved anything dangerous, was clearly loving this storm. I'm a fan of storms too, but it was obvious this wasn't just any thunderstorm. It was a tornado. She kept running outside to watch, even as the hail started to pour down. To make things worse, a flood of customers rushed into our store. The local mall had kicked everyone out, and now there were hundreds of people scrambling for shelter in the nearby stores. My cashier, still determined to catch a glimpse of the funnel cloud, kept trying to dart outside, even though the Weather Channel had just reported that it was less than 2 miles away and already on the ground. Eventually, I managed to herd everyone inside and locked the doors. But within minutes, the wind tore them open and hail started pelting the entrance. For some reason, we had rope, probably for a sign that hadn't gone up yet. So, I had to lash the doors shut and stand there, holding them closed while the storm raged on. I'll never forget how green everything was. The clouds, the lightning, it all had a greenish tint. We never did see the funnel, but suddenly it was over and the sun came out like nothing had happened. I've been through Hurricane Rita, Ike, and Harvey and grew up with tornadoes, so I thought I'd seen it all. But the scariest experience happened during a bad line of storms when my husband was at work and I was alone in a 24-foot travel trailer with our newborn. The weather report said there were 3 tornadoes on the ground in our area, and the sky had this sickly green tint to it. I grabbed my baby, and with him bundled up, I set out on foot to my mom's house, which was about 200 yards away. Hail started pounding us as we went, covering my son in icy pellets. Once we made it inside, I rushed to the interior of the house and got into the heavy cast iron tub, laying a towel over my son, who was still asleep, in case any glass shattered or debris hit us. I was half lying on top of him when I started hearing the house breathe. Trees snapped in the yard, and I could hear the crack of the power line getting ripped down. When the storm finally passed, I went to check on the camper, and it was clear how close we'd come to disaster. The yard had flooded from all the rain that week, so the camper tires were essentially floating. The trailer had moved about 8 feet from its original spot, and there were drag marks in the mud. That was the moment I realized just how lucky we were to have made it through. It scared the hell out of me. When I was in college, I worked as a delivery driver for a Japanese restaurant that was about a 20-minute drive from campus. One snowy day, I had a shift and decided to leave about an hour and a half before my scheduled time, knowing the weather would be rough. I should have called in and said it wasn't safe to drive, but I was being dumb, thinking maybe I'd get great tips for braving the storm. As soon as I hit the small highway that led to the restaurant, I realized how big of a mistake I'd made. I literally couldn't see anything in front of me, but I kept going anyway, my anxiety building with every passing minute. I'd heard the term white knuckle before, but I truly understood it now. My hands were gripping the wheels so tight, I could feel the stress in my whole body. I finally made it to the restaurant and was just about to pull into the parking lot when I got a call from my boss. She told me they weren't sure if they'd need me, so I should wait an hour. They'd forgotten I didn't live in town and had to drive quite a bit to get there, so they thought I was still at home. I was frustrated, but I decided to kill the time by walking around Target for an hour. Not long after, I got another call saying they weren't going to need me at all and I shouldn't come in. So I had to get back in my car and drive another hour and a half in stressful weather, all for nothing. No tips, no pay, just a wasted day and a whole lot of anxiety. I live in New York, so I'm used to storms, but none were as terrifying as Hurricane Sandy. Where I lived in Queens, we didn't face any major damage, but the sound of the wind howling through the night was absolutely unsettling. There was a huge tree right across the street from our apartment, and every time I heard a loud crack, I thought for sure it was going to fall right into my bedroom. That night, trying to sleep felt nearly impossible. Luckily, our block was spared, but the one just over had multiple trees fall, though thankfully they didn't land on any homes. The worst part came in the aftermath. My university was closed for a week because so many trees had been uprooted and were blocking roads. Friends who lived near the southern shore were hit much harder, losing nearly everything they had. I didn't have classes for the week, so I went to visit my sister at work. The entire east side of Manhattan, up to 42nd Street, had no power at all. It felt surreal, walking through Manhattan with no lights, seeing the flooding in lower Manhattan, and witnessing the destruction the storm left in its wake. It was a strange and humbling experience to see such a familiar place transformed by the storm's fury. When I was in 5th grade, my family rode out Hurricane Ivan at home in Bruton, Alabama, which was one of the hardest hit areas. I can still vividly remember the storm's intensity. The wind was so fierce, it felt like the walls were alive, almost like they were breathing. The howling wind was deafening, so loud that it made my ears ring, and I honestly thought I was hearing a siren or something. My toddler brother and I were sharing a room, but after a window was ripped out of its frame, we had to pile into my parents' room for safety. Outside, huge trees were snapping like twigs in the wind. The aftermath was just as bad. We went without running water for an entire week and had no power for nearly a month. If they hadn't distributed MREs, we likely would have gone hungry. People who lived out in the country had it even worse, resorting to poaching just to survive. It was a tough ordeal, but we made it through somehow. When I was a teenager, my room was upstairs at the corner of the house. I'm one of those people who can sleep through almost anything, so just the fact that a storm woke me up was a little unsettling. Then, I heard this long rumble of thunder. But as it went on, I realized it wasn't thunder at all. It was the wind. Then my whole room started shaking. Panic set in, and I ran straight for the basement. As I was dashing down, lightning was flashing like crazy, and the roar of the storm was deafening, accompanied by cracking thunder that rattled everything around me. It turns out a funnel cloud had likely passed directly over our house. It touched down just a few hundred yards away, and based on the damage, it seemed like it went right over us. Huge tree limbs just outside my room had snapped, and a bunch of shingles had been ripped off the roof, most of them right above my room. The gutter outside had been torn off the house completely. From what I later found, the damage suggested it was a strong F2 or weak F3 tornado. This was before the EF scale replaced the F scale. My parents' house was on a hill, and my room was on the most downhill side. Even though it was a 2-story house, my window actually looked out over what felt like a 3-story drop just a few feet from the house. I fully believe that if the tornado had hit while I was still in my room, and I don't know the exact timing of when I ran downstairs versus when the funnel cloud passed by, I wouldn't have made it out in time. I feel like I would have been killed. Thankfully, warning technology has improved a lot since then. If something like that happened today, I'd likely get a warning in time to take cover. But that night, the warning didn't come until about a minute after I was safely downstairs. Now, I'm a little paranoid about checking the weather before bed. I have 2 stories. The first one isn't all that scary, but it stuck with me. While I was 13, I was sitting at home during a thunderstorm, just minding my own business. I looked out the front door and saw this weird purplish flash of light, followed by the loudest bang I've ever heard, right near some of my neighbor's trees. It didn't hit me what had happened until it happened again. After the storm passed, we went to check it out, and the trees had a huge strip of bark completely blown off, about 5 inches wide. I really wish we had taken pictures of it, but at the time, I don't think we fully realized how crazy it was. The second story happened just last year. I was driving home when I suddenly heard tornado sirens. I flipped through the radio and found a station that was tracking the twister. They named the highway I was on, and then said the exit I was about to take was right in its path. It was literally right above me. I panicked and sped up until I could pull over and take cover. Luckily, the tornado never really formed or touched down, but I definitely saw the clouds starting to rotate and spiral down. It was close, though. The scariest moment was when I was driving over a large metal grid bridge, 3 lanes in each direction, during an ice storm. cars in front of me started braking because of an accident up ahead. Suddenly, the car in front of us lost control, spinning in circles on the ice-covered bridge. It was pure luck that we managed to come to a stop without slamming into the bridge's side rails or the cars in front of us. I honestly have no idea how we avoided a crash. My wife and I were driving through the Arizona desert when we got caught in a sudden thunderstorm. It was pouring rain, and to make matters worse, our convertible top was leaking, so we had to stuff towels across the screen to try to stop the water from pouring in. But then the storm intensified. Lightning struck the ground and hit cacti on either side of the road. I was driving at barely 10 to 15 miles per hour, struggling to see through the downpour. With the headlights on, emergency flashers blinking, and the wipers working overtime, I could barely keep the car on track. Out of nowhere, I noticed flashing red and blue lights in my rearview mirror. A cop car was slowly gaining on us. I told my wife, "I'm not stopping for him." The officer crept up beside us, took a quick look, and then just kept going, not bothering to pull us over. We've seen our fair share of intense thunderstorms in Australia, but nothing like that. It was an experience I'll never forget. I've lived in Arizona for 20 years, and during a drive to California, we got caught in a dust storm that was so thick we couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. It was one of the scariest drives I've ever had because it was nearly impossible to see the other drivers. Then, on the way back from Show Low through Globe, we hit an absolutely massive monsoon storm that had us convinced we were about to crash. The lightning was flashing above us and all around, and the rain was coming down so hard it felt like we were driving through a wall of water. I remember my wife, calm as can be, telling my sister, who was driving at the time, to just focus on the white lines on the right side of the road. We were panicking, but she kept her cool. Somehow, we managed to get ahead of the storm near Gold Canyon. Another time, I had to pull over and wait for a storm to pass. It's not as dangerous in the city, but on the highways, those monsoons can get intense. The sheer size of the storm we drove through that day was unbelievable. Monsoon and haboob season here, it's no joke. Back when I was in K-8, someone high up in the school administration got the idea that leaving the building's doors open during a tornado would somehow protect it from a negative pressure explosion. I'll never forget the principal walking through the school during a tornado warning, grumbling to himself about how some people believe anything they hear, as he went around shutting all the doors that had been left propped open. When I was just a little kid, maybe 6 or 7, I remember looking up at my dad and my older brother, both towering over me, and asking my dad if I'd ever get as tall as them. He feigned this dramatic shock, his eyes widening as he exclaimed, "Your mother hasn't told you yet?" Immediately, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. What was this secret I was supposed to know? Was it something bad? My dad looked down at me, a mischievous glint in his eye, and said in a serious tone, "Son, I thought you knew. Your mom, well, she was with a midget, and that's how you were born. You're not going to get any taller than you are right now." I burst into tears, a wail escaping my lips as I ran to my room, completely devastated by this unbelievable news. Eventually, my mom came in, her expression a mix of amusement and concern, and told me gently that my dad was just teasing me. He had a rather unique sense of humor, it seems. It sounds like our dads might have been cut from the same cloth. Band camp. Those 2 words alone can conjure up some strange memories, but this one takes the cake. The weather that particular day was atrocious, a real summer storm brewing. Our band director, already on edge, finally snapped and, in a fit of frustration, dismissed us for lunch 15 minutes ahead of schedule. Great, right? Except the band room was locked tight. He'd apparently decided to head out immediately. And since it was July, the rest of the school was also completely locked up. So there we were, maybe 25 of us, still too young to drive, or without rides from older friends stranded outside. We huddled together under the narrow awning at the front of the school, seeking a meager bit of shelter as the sky continued to darken ominously. That's when things went from bad to surreal. In the distance, at the far end of the marching band field, the very field where we should have still been practicing, a small but undeniably terrifying tornado touched down. At first, we just saw a line of trees violently snapping in half, a bizarre and unsettling sight that didn't quite register. But as the funnel cloud emerged from the tree line and began to churn its way across the open field towards us, the horrifying reality sank in. Panic mixed with disbelief rippled through our little group. We were trapped with nowhere to go. Most of us just pressed ourselves against the brick wall, our backs to the impending vortex, watching in stunned silence as it barreled straight for us. Having seen tornadoes before, even a couple up close, I can tell you with absolute certainty that witnessing one bearing down on you with no hope of shelter is an entirely different level of terror. Then, in a moment that felt both miraculous and utterly bizarre, just as the tornado reached the edge of the bus loop, the road directly in front of us, it inexplicably lifted back into the sky. We were left there, traumatized, drenched to the bone, and frankly in shock. The worst part? When our still furious band director finally returned from his lunch, he refused to believe our wild story. We had to finish the rest of the afternoon as if nothing extraordinary had happened. I'm 30 now, and when my partner and I were house hunting, a basement was non-negotiable. That day at band camp instilled in me a deep and abiding fear of tornadoes, a stark contrast to the naive fascination I once held for those powerful storms. When I was a kid at Boy Scout camp, I somehow ended up alone at our campsite during a rainstorm. I was standing under the tarp, letting rain drip into my poncho just to pass the time, when, boom, the loudest sound I've ever heard exploded around me. It was like the air got punched out of my lungs. I jumped straight into the air, and when I hit the ground, splinters were falling like hail, followed by smaller branches and a shower of shredded leaves. A tree about 30 feet behind me had been struck by lightning, split clean down the trunk to the ground. One 4-inch splinter actually pierced through my poncho, and I kept it as a souvenir. To this day, I can't believe I didn't crap my pants. I live in a town that was hit hard by Hurricane Sandy. It was terrifying, and none of us saw it coming. The year before, Hurricane Irene had caused a huge stir. Everyone evacuated, bracing for disaster, but it turned out to be almost nothing. So when Sandy approached, most of us assumed it would be more of the same. In fact, we were originally supposed to go to school the day the storm hit. It wasn't until the night before that classes were canceled. That morning, the rain came down in sheets. My town sits on a peninsula with the bay on one side and the ocean on the other. The bay began pouring over the seawall. Storm drains backed up and flooded. The ocean surged toward us. It became clear that we were trapped between two rising forces. My family decided we'd leave as soon as low tide hit. We packed what we could and drove to my aunt's house, about 40 minutes inland. From there, we watched the news in horror. The broadcast showed entire neighborhoods underwater, transformers exploding and igniting fires, and massive pieces of our boardwalk drifting through flooded streets like driftwood. I felt sick to my stomach, watching the place I'd grown up fall apart in real time. It was surreal, how quickly everything changed, how wrong we'd been to underestimate it. I'll never forget that helpless feeling, watching our home from a distance, unsure of what would be left when we returned. I've always wondered what causes the sky to turn those strange shades of yellow and green. Once, I watched it shift from yellow to green, then suddenly fill with thick black clouds. It was the middle of the afternoon, but everything went dark, unnaturally dark. The air became eerily still, and I could feel the pressure drop like something huge was about to happen. For a moment, I was sure a hurricane was coming, but nothing ever did. As far as I know, the last real hurricane to hit where I live was back in the 80s, and even then, storms around here are rare and usually not very destructive. Still, that moment stuck with me, like nature had briefly hinted at something much more powerful than what it ultimately delivered. When I was in high school, we had this massive rainstorm after a particularly wet winter. Our snowpack was something crazy, like 200% of normal. So, when the rain came, the ground was already completely saturated and couldn't absorb any more moisture. At the time, my family lived in this strange, split-level house, half of which was underground. We also had a septic tank. With the ground so soaked, our leach field couldn't do its job, and everything had to go somewhere. That somewhere, right back into the house. Our downstairs area was flooded with about a foot of raw sewage water. It was beyond disgusting. The smell was unbearable, and the mess was something I wouldn't wish on anyone. When I bought my own house years later, I made sure it was far from any flooding zones, and I made absolutely certain it didn't have a septic tank. I wasn't taking any chances. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you in the next video.